Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started here. It's a pleasure to see you all here. My name is Naz Barma. I'm the director of the Scrivner Institute of Public Policy here at the Corbell School and an associate professor at the Corbell School. The Scrivner Institute of Public Policy has an interdisciplinary mandate on campus to be a hub for public policy issues across the campus and that face the community. So we're thrilled today to have all of you here to engage in a conversation about the Farm Bill. As we begin, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement to acknowledge the context of where we stand. I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Denver campus sits on the ancestral homeland of the Cheyenne and Arapaho people who have stewarded this land for generations and whose loss we recognize and mourn. We offer continued respect and support to them and to all the indigenous tribes and communities who call, and nations who call Colorado and the Rocky Mountain West home. We commit to listening and affirming their stories as we will listen to and affirm many stories today. We're so pleased to have everyone here again for what is now the 6th installment of the Scrivner Policy Roundtable. Especially delighted to welcome today's presenters, whom I'll introduce in just a minute, and welcome to our representatives from our other roundtable partners, MPP and other students. We have a class from the geography department here. Delighted to have you all here today. Thanks for joining us. Staff and faculty working on public policy issues across campus. We're very glad to be joined by Doug Scrivner. Good morning, Doug, whose generous endowment of the Scrivner Institute of Public Policy makes our work possible. The Scrivner Policy Roundtable, the event series that we're here for today, foregrounds a local policy focus by bringing in conversation a group of practitioners, scholars, who are committed to evidence-based policy making and to having evidence-based conversations around policy. And you'll see that manifested today among the panel. One of our main goals, in fact, the main goal, is to build a collaborative network, a research and learning environment among many of us in this community working on local policy issues. In order to kind of make that happen, this is an invitation-only event. The goal is to cultivate an intimate and focused avenue for all of us to understand policy challenges in the community, for policy actors to discuss their work, and enhance our shared understanding of the local policy ecosystem. Ideally, and this has happened in the past, events like this will spark future collaboration among those of us who are here today. A particular thank you before I introduce the panel to Katie Aker, who is the Assistant Director of the Scrivner Institute. Katie is instrumental, thank you. Katie is instrumental in implementing the roundtable concept. Katie is also instrumental in the fact that we have caffeine this morning, and she asked me to let everybody know that we will have more caffeine in 10 minutes. The coffee is on its way. I want to encourage everybody to please, at any point during the conversation, hop up, get some more food, get some more coffee. This is an informal event, so please do that. I'd also like to thank Megan Grogan, the Center on American Politics, who has been extremely helpful today. Format, we're going to record the presentation today. Again, this is a closed-door session, but we, if possible, like to share the kind of formal part of the presentation with the community. We're then going to turn off the microphones, turn off the recording, and bring people together in small group discussions around the tables that will be facilitated by students from the Conflict Engagement and Resolution Initiative. Did I get it right? I say it many times, and thank you. That is directed by Professor Tamara Destray, who's one of the organizers today. We look forward to having those conversations with all of you. So to get to the topic of the conversation today, it is the Farm Bill, which, as you all know, is an omnibus multi-year legislative effort that addresses a range of critical issues relevant to Colorado farmers and ranchers, consumers, and the natural environment. To help us make sense of the process, content, and significance of the bill, key ongoing debates, and how the bill can best help Colorado consumers, producers, and the environment, we have an incredible panel. Dr. Ann Bybee-Finley, who is Assistant Professor of Agroecology at North Carolina State University. Mindy DePaula, Senior Manager at the Community and Equity at the Agricultural Methane Team Environmental Defense Fund. Lauren Kelso, who's the Policy Chair at the Flatiron Farmers Coalition. And James Thompson, the Regional Director of Northern Colorado Eastern Plains of the Office of U.S. Senator Michael Bennet. Our organizers today and also panelists, Dr. Ritwik Ghosh, I said it wrong. I knew I had it, and Dr. Ritwik Ghosh, Assistant Professor and Scrivner Faculty Affiliate here at the Corbell School, and Dr. Tamara Pearson-Destre, Professor and Scrivner Faculty Affiliate here at the Corbell School. Huge thanks, Ritwik and Tamara, for getting this together today. It's a wonderful example of exactly what we're trying to do. We're thrilled to have you all here. Without further ado, pass it over to Ritwik.
Thank you so much, Naz, and thank you so much, everyone, for being here. As you nibble on your eggs and sip your coffee, this is a good time to think about where our food comes from, which, surprise, surprise, are farms. And the main policy governing the production of food and the many other aspects of agriculture in the United States is the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is an omnibus legislation, which means it packs in a lot, and it passed every 5 years. But a lot of us might not know much about the Farm Bill, how it originates, what are some major aspects of the Farm Bill. So maybe I can turn to you first, Anne, to give us a little understanding of the history of the Farm Bill, some of the key aspects that constitute the bill, and maybe something you think is important to focus on.
Thanks, Ritwik. Well, I guess first off, I'm just interested, is anybody, how familiar are people right now with the Farm Bill? Zero, a little bit, have heard of it before? So the one thing is that it's introduced as omnibus legislation, right? So everything gets packed into the bus, right? You have it's legislation that's passed every 5 to 7 years, and it is subdivided into these titles that contain there's a commodity crop title, there's a specialty crop title, crop insurance, food and nutrition, research, international trade. And in fact, I have this giant binder here on my lap. I can't even lift it with one hand. That's the 2008 Farm Bill. So I encourage people, I'll put this on a table, I just encourage people to look through it. It's really hard to read, and it's iterative in that it's based, the past Farm Bill, the current Farm Bill is based on the language of the past Farm Bill. All farm bills, I would say, have 3 primary aspects. The first one is food nutrition programs. The second one is support for farmers. And the third one are conservation efforts. And they're kind of framed in the issues that are happening in the United States at that time. So the origins of the Farm Bill, like many things, began with the Dust Bowl. And I want to unpack that because we often talk the Dust Bowl as an era. But I want us to think about the Dust Bowl as a time when mechanization and tractors became common, when farmers could then, plow a lot more land, right? And plowing is you're turning over soil. So what happened is that we took these perennial grasslands located across the center of America, and those grasslands are so integral for keeping the soil in the ground, for keeping the moisture of the soil. So what happened is when we tore them up, then we had several years of bad weather, and we had some droughts. So we had this overproduction, and all of a sudden, that soil moisture, this precious resource, it became this ecological crisis, which reached a point when the dust reached, DC. And so Henry Wallace was a person who was the Secretary of Ag, who had this very comprehensive vision of the Farm Bill, and it was based on this very old notion of the ever-normal granary, which, ancient civilizations, since the beginning of time, it's the government in that place had said, okay, we have a surplus, we should protect the surplus, we should then disseminate it when times are hard, right? And this has happened all over the world. So it was this, very old idea, and the idea was also to help protect producers, that had an oversupply, that were faced with very low prices. And then you also had people didn't have access to food. So could we, redistribute this food? And so then, that was the first Farm Bill, and it went through various eras. So World War II, we were drafting people into the war, right? So many people were malnourished, we were turning them away. That's where, school lunch programs began to take effect, right? School nutrition programs were trying to protect national security. Then after the war, there was this intensification, right? The government had recruited a lot of chemical companies to produce chemicals. They needed to find new products. We got into more industrial synthetic intensification of agriculture, which reduced the amount of labor needed on farms. So then folks moved away from farms. And this is sort of the path and trend and historical legacy of the Farm Bills that have built up over time. And so now we have a relatively small population, like less than 2% of the United States population is in agriculture, is producing the food. And then we have a sizable population located in both very urban and rural areas that are food insecure. They do not have access to nutritious food. So I think, that kind of sets up an interesting political dynamic and gives you this very broad overview of U.S. farming.
Thank you so much. That was good to learn a little bit about where this law comes from, all the way back in the Dust Bowl and the New Deal times. Let me turn to you, James. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the Farm Bill and how Senator Bennett is seeing the Farm Bill. We know that Senator Bennett has been a part of passing, I think, 2 Farm Bills so far. He has been organizing many listening sessions, is now the chair of the Conservation Subcommittee in the Senate Agriculture Committee. So how is Senator Bennett seeing the Farm Bill? What are the key challenges he sees in the agricultural sector? Where is the industry, perhaps specifically in Colorado, succeeding? Where is it struggling? And what is the role of the Farm Bill in addressing? Can you give us a little bit of a sense of how Senator Bennett sees the Farm Bill?
Yeah, I may not do it in that order, but I do have some notes here. Senator Bennett, he became senator in 2009, and his first, the committee that he first wanted to serve on was the Ag Committee. He knew how important the industry was to Colorado, and he admittedly, and to this day will still say he has a lot more to learn about agriculture. But being on the committee, I think, is a way that he could serve Colorado in a unique way. And so he's been on the Ag Committee ever since. And now he is the chair of the Conservation and a subcommittee, which also covers forestry as well. So, that's another element that I'm not going to get into too much, but the Farm Bill does cover forestry and, huge component of the Farm Bill for Colorado specifically and for the West. Yes, so we do this every time we pass a Farm Bill. We organize a bunch of listening sessions, or we try to pass a Farm Bill, all over the state. This past year, Senator Bennett organized 26 listening sessions. He didn't attend all of them. He attended 3 of them, Pueblo, Fort Collins, and one with the Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, in Palisade on the western slope. And and I helped to organize, and I was at those with our DC staff. We brought them out, and all over the state. And we consistently heard from farmers and ranchers about a lot of the headwinds they're facing. A big one here, of course, is drought. Another one is, just in terms of the FSA and NRCS offices and the staff there is really insufficient for their needs in terms of the availability of staff and technical assistance for the programs that they want to participate in. Some of those themes, we have shortage of labor, which isn't necessarily always directly addressed in the Farm Bill, but there are some elements of labor in the Farm Bill. The shifting markets, which the Farm Bill safety nets and other programs are meant to help farmers through when prices go down and when costs go up. And of course, cost is another major thing. Something more recent that we've heard a lot about, and maybe it hasn't been as bad lately, is supply chain, and we all experienced that during the pandemic. But I think one of the big things is that we had heard a lot about the you could call it red tape, but the need for more flexibility in Farm Bill programs for producers. I think Senator Bennett sees this reauthorization, and of course, as I don't believe it was mentioned, but we were supposed to pass the Farm Bill last year, a 5-year Farm Bill. So it's a 5-year bill, and it lasts that long for a reason. It's so farmers can have certainty, right? And so when we passed, like last year, we passed a 1-year extension. That's okay, I guess, but farmers want to see more certainty, more long-term certainty as to what programs are going to be there down the road for them, because they have a long-term operation. They may not make a profit 1 year, but they're waiting until the next year or 2 years down the road to turn a profit, and their operation really does depend on that long-term certainty and programs being in place that can help them. I think, what MIGA wants to see is for these programs to work for producers, especially in the West, which it's a very different agriculture atmosphere in the West as opposed to the South or the Midwest. Drought being one of those, but it's just we produce a bit different products here than other places, and we just have different challenges than other places. And then, wildfire is another issue that we face, and it's something that affects our entire watershed. So, agriculture does rely on clean water and plenty of water, which is sometimes difficult to come by in Colorado and the West. But, protecting our watershed specifically from the risk of wildfire is a major component, and our producers generally support our efforts there. You may have heard in recent, are you going to cover the recent developments, or should I just do an overview?
Let's get to it. Let's move forward, okay. And I'll ask you some specifics. Let me
get to really some of the priorities that Michael has in the Farm Bill, and I have a lot here, but I'm just going to do a top line and just do the 5. He's like, move on. I mentioned it several times already, addressing the Western water crisis, whether that's a Colorado River, or the South Platte, or elsewhere in the West. Making sure that programs work for Colorado and the West, and that's very broad, but again, looking at incorporating flexibilities into programs, making sure that we have programs, we have funding, that funding gets out on the ground, because that is an issue when there's a backlog and there's, I guess you could say, a bottleneck at USDA offices for those programs to come out and to get to the producers. Investing in our forests and watershed health, and climate change. It's something that has not come up today yet, but I'm sure we'll get to more. Climate change and clean energy. And so addressing climate change, finding ways for farmers to not only adapt to climate change, but ways that they can help help with reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And finally, in regard to nutrition, make sure we strengthen the regional food systems, and that we continue and strengthen nutrition programs. And so I guess I'll just stop there.
No, thank you so much, James. And I think these are set of the stage for us to go deeper a little bit to understand some of the specific policies that Senator Bennett is looking for in thinking about, maybe climate change a little bit more, watershed, the importance of droughts and managing for that in the Western United States. I think that's very important, and I think we have a great opportunity here to go a little deeper into these. Interestingly, the Farm Bills, 2/3 of the Farm Bill actually goes to support nutritional programs. Only 1/3 of it is actually meant to support farmers. On that question of farmers, maybe I can turn to you, Lauren. You have been a farmer yourself and have engaged in the programs that James is speaking about from the perspective of the farmers. Maybe you can help us a little bit to understand how you see the question of how do you see this experience of engaging with the Farm Bill? What do you think is some of the challenges for the farming industry here in Colorado? How do you see the Farm Bill enabling the industry? Where is it complicating the success of the industry? James spoke about flexibility, spoke about funding. Maybe you can touch on those.
Yeah, flexibility and funding are a really good place to start. I think that, so just to give a little perspective, I work in small vegetable production, specialty crops, run nursery and a vegetable operation for the last 13 years in Boulder. And then with my role at the Flatirons Farmers Coalition, that's a chapter of the National Young Farmers Coalition. So a lot of people the policies I'm kind of paying attention to in the community that I sort of represent in my world is that sort of scale. So young, beginning, small scale. We joke that we changed the name of the Flatirons Farmers Coalition because I aged out of that young piece a couple years ago. But I do think that the perspective of young, small scale, people that are really trying to get businesses started in this industry, there's just a lot of echoes across a lot of different types of production. So I think as far as my community of farmers and producers, I think a lot of the challenges that we face when it comes to interacting with the programs that are set forth in the Farm Bill is around bureaucracy, right? It's around that red tape or what is required to utilize those programs. As Ann so beautifully pointed out, the development of this Farm Bill and the USDA and all of the support programs kind of rose at the same rate as our industrial ag system, right? So it's there to support a lot of our commodity producers. We're talking very large scale sort of industrial ag. And it's done a great job, especially in the last couple iterations, of starting to try to identify what producers of a lot of different scales need, and at least starting to ask that question. And a lot of the programs are built for these really big producers. So a good example would be you've got payments through EQIP and CSP, which are a couple of our conservation programs. And they're built for, you get $1.50 per acre. Well, if you echo that into 30,000 acres, that's a really good cost share program. That is going to help you meet your bottom lines. If you do $1.30 per acre on 3 acres of production, guess how worth your time that is. So that's a little bit of an extreme, but it's not that extreme. My experience with participating in these programs was a few years back, maybe 5 years ago or so, I heard about this CSP program. It is the Conservation Stewardship Program through NRCS. And it is essentially, you fill out some paperwork, you enroll with your local conservation office, and they provide you some funding to buy things like cover crop, diversify your crops, integrate livestock, some really important, wonderful things for creating sort of a sustainable farm system. But when I went through that process, there was X number of hours that it took me and one of my staff members to fill out the paperwork. We got enrolled into the program after multiple years. James mentioned the lack of staff at our NRCS offices. It's just they just need more people in those field offices, so it took a long time to get through that process. And then we got out the other side of it, and our payment was $1,500 for 5 years. Grant you, it's a 5-year program, that's great. I went ahead and calculated the staff time that it took us to do that, and it meant that the first 2 years were null. It was about $3,000 worth of staff time, and that's being very generous. That's what I could calculate of how long it took us to get enrolled in that program. So that's just an example of how, and that's for a minimum payment. That, we won't get into those details, but it's complicated, and suffice to say it wasn't worth it. So I think that's what a lot of small-scale producers are experiencing. And so that's both funding and logistics, right? Of like, how do you get into these programs? And so the other piece that I think is how, Ann also mentioned that this is also tied into sort of our academic world. So in the research realm, how is information coming down to producers, and what information are we getting once we get there? So the Farm Bill does, it is also research. It covers, research and information, and a lot of it comes through technical assistance. So a lot of different technical assistance. CSU in the state of Colorado provides technical assistance for farmers. We have also our federal offices that help do that. And basically, when we get this information, it's often still written as if we all had soil science degrees, but my degree was in journalism 25 years ago, and I learned everything I know about farming by doing it. The people that I am learning from are my peers. Nobody at CSU taught me how to change hydraulic fluid on a tractor, right? I learned from other farmers. And I think that is one thing that I'm really interested to see in this next farm bill. And I've seen some push, also because that also is a problem for people that are indigenous producers, right? They have much different way of doing things, a much way of passing down knowledge and wisdom. And so they're trying to make some space in that research and information where there's peer-to-peer education, I think is another interesting little nugget. And of course, I am super focused in on that 1/3 that is producer-directed, but I think there's a lot of work to be done around how do we connect those small producers with the communities that need the food that is nutritious and healthful and feeding our communities. So I'll leave there.
Thank you, Lauren. We mentioned a few acronyms, so I thought I'll just
yeah, sorry.
when we're talking about government, there are acronyms. In the Farm Bill, there is something called the conservation title, and in the conservation title, which is mainly the part of the Farm Bill directed to support environmental objectives at the farm level, and within that, there are a number of programs that are based in the logic that farmers would appreciate direct financial support. Those could be something like a cost share. So if you're taking some kind of environmental you're installing something on the farm, maybe you're putting a hedgerow to prevent the wind. You could get support from the federal government to share the cost of installing something like this. You also have other programs which directly incentivize farmers to take up some kind of conservation practices. One of the prominent such practices is something we call no-till, where you reduce or you do not till your soil before you seed it. And another one is called cover cropping, where you put a crop in between your two main seasons, between your seasons. Some of the programs here are the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, which is called EQIP, and the CSP, which Lauren was talking about, called the Conservation Stewardship Program. There's also something called the Conservation Reserve Program, which we haven't touched on. The red tape that we're talking about, which is so important to this discussion, is largely referring to two main government agencies, which is the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which administers a lot of these conservation programs, which we refer to here as NRCS. You might hear that again and again. And there's another agency called the Farm Service Agency, which is the FSA. Let me turn to you, Mindy, a little bit here. You worked on so many different aspects of agriculture, from issues of air pollution that come from farms, as well as the new opportunities that might lie in leveraging farms and agriculture for addressing climate change, what we sometimes call climate smart agriculture. I wanted to get your thoughts on what you see as the major issues in agriculture and where the Farm Bill fits in addressing these. And I'd be particularly interested to hear about your work on livestock methane.
Yeah, sure. For those two who don't know, Environmental Defense Fund, we're a pretty large environmental nonprofit, and actually we're global now. I sit on the Climate Smart Agriculture team, as Ritwik mentioned, and specifically I do focus on livestock methane, but with a different lens, I think, so we might pivot a little bit here. I'm focused a lot on environmental justice. So first, our team as a whole, the ag methane team, we're really focused on exactly that, agricultural methane and reducing methane emissions from agriculture. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas emission that I'm sure you've heard of, and a great contributor to climate change. And 32% of human-made methane emissions come from livestock in the United States. So it's something that we're really focused on in our fight against climate change. And that comes in livestock mostly from enteric and manure. So enteric is really mostly cow burps, not farts, as people think. Cow burps, and then manure management, mostly from dairy cows, and then also hogs or pigs, swine. And so that's really our focus when it comes to methane reduction as a team and as an organization. We also do work on row crops as well, but that's not my specific area of focus, but I'm happy to touch on it later if you have specific questions about it. In terms of environmental justice, why does that relate to methane? Well, we're all interested in reducing methane emissions for the climate, but there are some side effects that occur sometimes with certain methane-reducing technologies, and those can pollute the local community, even though our net climate emissions are reducing. And so one of the big ones that we're focused on right now is ammonia. I know ammonia is in Windex. You may not think it's a big deal. It has the potential to form fine particulate matter, or PM 2.5 if you've heard of that, when it reacts with the atmospheric gases. And that's really harmful to human health. That can cause a lot of respiratory issues, that can cause allergies or exacerbate them, that can have a lot of cardiovascular issues, low birth weight. There are a lot of health concerns with particulate matter from ammonia. And in the United States, 60% of ammonia emissions come from livestock ag. So it's a really, really, really big portion, and we see it as quite low-hanging fruit, to be honest, in terms of reducing that ammonia for local air pollution. I'll touch a little bit on a technology that we really like in terms of both climate and also clean energy. Something that we support is what's called an anaerobic digester, and you may have heard of that in a biogas conversation or something like that. I'm going to simplify it a lot, so if you do know about anaerobic digesters, forgive me, at least I will probably reduce it quite a bit, but essentially you put raw manure into a closed system, it captures all the methane that had been coming off of the manure, and it spits out, oh, this is kind of yucky, I hope everyone's finished with their meal. It spits out a little bit less of a liquid manure, so it's a more solid manure, it's easier to control when it comes to nutrient application, and it has less methane, almost none actually methane coming off of it because it was all captured in the digester. The problem is that if the system hasn't been kind of holistically approached when they installed the digester, ammonia can still come off of what's the digest state, off of the manure that's come out of the digester. And there are ways to prevent that, but oftentimes these policies and incentives and cost shares are really focused on just the digester and not what comes out of it. And so with environmental justice and the piece that I look at when we do public comments or when we look at new policies, I'm looking at guardrails to put in place with our incentives to make sure that, yes, we're reducing methane emissions, yes, we're supporting farmers in helping them be able to afford these technologies, but also we're protecting our local communities and local ecosystems as well. I have some Farm Bill priorities specifically if you want me to touch on that. EDF we're a science-first organization. All of our policy and advocacy work is based from our Office of the Chief Scientist, where I used to sit. We push overall for a farm bill that has a focus on research, data, finance, and innovation. And that's really to support farmers and ranchers, to increase their productivity, to create rural jobs, to better withstand climate change, and also, like I said, to protect local ecosystems and local communities. And so we're pushing for this next farm bill for three major priorities. The first being reducing agricultural climate emissions through strong incentives. So what does that mean specifically? Protecting the historic IRA investment. That's a big one for us in terms of rural climate solutions. Promoting manure methane solutions, funding and investing in enteric methane solutions, again, addressing the cow burps, which, by the way, is usually from the feed additives and controlling their diet a little bit more. And then optimizing fertilizer use, which I won't talk a ton about, but fertilizer, applying nitrogen and being aware of the nitrous oxide, again, in the waterways, et cetera, for local ecosystems and communities is something that we're really focused on. The other two, more broadly, are building agricultural resilience to unavoidable climate effects. And so that's mostly covers crop insurance and making sure that row crops and farmers working with row crops have insurance there and improving their financial literacy as well. And then finally, investing in innovation, data, and measurement. And this is really important for us because as a science-based organization, you can't address the problem if you don't know how big the problem is. You can't address it if you don't know where specifically it's coming from. And we'd like to do it really in an anonymized way, so we're not pointing the finger at anyone. Our farmers are feeding our country, so it's not about placing the blame. It's trying to figure out where it's coming from so that we can help reduce the climate effects for everyone. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think what makes this panel particularly strong is that we have so many different perspectives on issues of agricultural policy and the Farm Bill. We have somebody speaking to it from the scientific perspective, from the farmer perspective as well, from a pollution and environmental justice perspective, and somebody who's right there, in the weed of things, trying to, converge these ideas and make them into policy here, James. So let me ask a question. I don't want to ask it specifically to anyone. I want to open it up broadly to everyone, and feel free to respond and react to each other's comments. But taking a slightly broader picture here, and going into some of the deep tension between production of food and the many environmental issues that emerge from the agricultural space. On one hand, some people say that the future of agriculture is about large, technologically driven farms that can feed this growing population of 9, 10, 11 billion. We see consolidation, as some speakers have already pointed out. We see massive farm sizes and massive combines and equipment that support them. We also see some amount of consolidation and downsizing or a narrowing of the retail sector that comes post-farm, the downstream. At the same time, we are also becoming so much more aware about the environmental issues that Mindy has pointed out that emerge from farms, from issues of air pollution, but also water pollution. We have vivid terms like dead zones that are coming up in the Gulf of Mexico, where fisheries are being affected, issues of nitrate pollution. We also are learning about the carbon dioxide emissions or greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from farms. We also have the social issues of farms where, there is an older population, people are leaving the industry to find jobs elsewhere. So, I'm putting all of this out here because I want to hear how you all see the role of the Farm Bill or federal policy in striking a balance in supporting agriculture and also addressing so many other aspects that we worry about in our food systems. So anybody would like to speak on that issue, just go ahead.
I can go first. So Vivek, that was like a lot of points that you threw out for us. I think what's really important for us to understand is that, the United States, at the beginning of the United States, the founding farmers, Thomas Jefferson was, envisioning we'll have this country of yeoman farmers, everyone has a farm, right? And over time, people have moved away from agriculture. I remember Stephen Colbert gave some testimony in Congress, and he was making a joke. He was like, if only we could raise the ground so that it wasn't so backbreaking to bend over and farm, right? Because farming is really difficult to do, and what we do have, despite that, is that the U.S. has many more small farms than it does have large farms, right? So if you're thinking about the distribution, if you're just thinking about the number of farms, there are way more small farms that exist in the United States today than there are large farms. Now, the large farms they are capturing a much greater percentage of production that's happening. Is this production going to food? Like feed corn, right? Not sweet corn, not the kind of corn you buy at the grocery store, but like just as an example, our most common commodity, it's like 40% is going to ethanol production. That's not food. 40% is going to livestock feed, so that's eventually becoming food, like downstream. And then so we're thinking about like, the number of small farms that exist, and those small farms tend to be more diversified. If you think about it from like, put your agroecological hat on, you're looking at spatial heterogeneity. So like, does the landscape essentially look different? How, and then like, what is the spatial scale of those differences? And if you think, oh, we have this more heterogeneous, landscape, you're probably delivering more ecosystem services. You're probably having like higher water quality. You're probably having higher biodiversity because you're growing more species, closer together. So you could start to think, in the future of the Farm Bill, there's still going to be very large farms. There's still going to be some smaller farms. What's happened over time is like the middle, like small and medium farms, those have really been squeezed out, and you've seen this bifurcation happening. And so it's like taking that where we are, like how can we enhance the ecosystem services of the small farms? How can we, like promote the benefits that they deliver, while also, you're not going to remove large farms from the equation, and they have a very different, set of constraints and decision makings, that they're thinking about. And I think the Farm Bill, if you say we have $1,000, just like easy math, we have $1,000. We can either give $1 to 1,000 people, or we could give like $500 to 2 people. From the government's perspective, it's much easier to say, like, we'll just give $500 to 2 people. We have better accountability there. So, I just am presenting these things so that we understand, like, what the distribution of farm sizes are, what are the constraints of the government that are allocating the resources to support different priorities. And I'll set that up for the rest of the panelists to add to.
Yeah, and I think I'll jump in there. I think one of the things that is so important about this Farm Bill, and as it changes, each time we get to redo it, is us thinking about what does agriculture look like in this country, and where is it struggling? And that accountability piece that Ann just mentioned at the end there is like what you hear when I got to dip my toe into Washington, D.C. last year, and it's like you hear that word, like, well, there's an accountability issue. I'm like, you're giving $5,000 to somebody who makes, $100K a year if they're lucky. You don't need to worry so much about accountability. Like they're not doing anything with it. There is like a little bit of a cognitive dissonance there when it comes to how we're talking about who needs these programs, how they are designed so that they can meet those needs, without getting too caught up in the idea that we're not talking about, we're giving $1 to a lot of different people, right? And it's and I'm not naive. Like I understand that there's a need for balance in all of that, but I do think that in this next iteration of the Farm Bill, I see people asking those questions. I think it's a really important piece to kind of focus on. And then on the environmental point, the other thing I just want to maybe repeat a little bit is when we are talking about these small and mid-sized farms, they are much better equipped to be thinking about a whole system. They aren't just fulfilling one need. Economics basically forces farms into just singular focus, just growing hogs, just raising cattle. They specialize, right? Because economically, that makes a lot more sense. If you are running a diversified farm, things get more complicated, but you can also be more thoughtful about how these systems feed each other. James was talking about drought earlier. We're talking about conservation programs. The way to keep the moisture in the soil is to be thoughtful about what we are planting in it, how long it is staying there, if we are tilling or not. So those things are connected. Like, we don't need to find more water. We need to be more thoughtful about the crops we are growing and how we are growing them so we keep the water we have. I mean, we do need to find more water. That would be nice too. But that's not like, there's a systems approach here that I think we lose when we start blowing it up into these really large scales.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with everything you said, and I want to highlight what Anne said of we won't remove large farms totally from the equation, and I think, you know, we like to see things from we consider ourselves realists, and sometimes like gets us some dirty looks, but I think understanding we can't totally remove large farms tomorrow, they are some of the biggest methane producers. And so when we look at, again, when I bring anaerobic digester as a solution up, you know, I think we'd like to see in this next farm bill support for both digesters so that, you know, we can reduce the methane with the guardrails and caveats in place that I mentioned. That is also on the table for a lot of other policies right now. When you think about clean energy and biogas, as an aside, when you capture the methane, you can then use it to produce biogas. But that's a whole other thing, so I'm going to kind of push that aside. But just know that there is that piece of it. At the same time, we'd really, we do want to support farmers and ranchers, and specifically small and medium farmers and ranchers are really important as we look at this next farm bill. A bill I want to highlight specifically, actually, our very own Senator Bennett that wrote it, unplanned to make Senator Bennett's office happy, but he wrote what's called the Emit Less Act. And I should have specifically figured out what all those letters mean, but I know that E and M are enteric methane. And so it's really focused, it's a marker bill proposed that would allow increased cost shares to adopt certain enteric methane reduction practices. So outside of our other guardrails, et cetera, really making sure that some of our small and medium farmers also have cost shares and incentives to adopt these practices that can also help reduce methane there as well on a smaller scale. Again, small and medium farmers aren't really the ones that are producing a ton of methane based on a lot of the things that you said before. So those are two we're looking at it from again, I try to say a realistic lens of addressing both the small and medium farmer needs, but also addressing this colossal methane reduction need as well.
See, James is getting ready. I just want to say one thing. Those small and medium-sized farmers are often the ones who are building their businesses and will someday be the larger ones. And that is something that's forgotten in these conversations a lot, so I just wanted to highlight it because that's the training ground, right? So that's where people learn best practice.
For the record, it's the Enteric Methane Innovation Tools for Lower Emissions and Sustainable Stock Act. Okay. But you know, that is a good point. We did work a lot with the livestock industry, dairy industry, CSU, and others in EDF and others on that bill, and you know, we're hopeful to see that get passed and be part of the farm bill. And by the way, and Lauren, by the way, I believe Senator Bennett actually used your story in a hearing on conservation programs and some of that red tape. So he invoked.
It's the closest I'll ever be to fame, James.
And you know, and by the way, Senator Bennett sends his regards. He couldn't be here today, but and also, you know, regarding the small farms versus large farms, you know, I think, you know, Secretary Vilsack, and he has a Colorado connection. He has family here. He, you know, did work with CSU and often visits. And, you know, most recently he was on, I want to say he was on a small farm kick. I don't know. He was here announcing a program that would help smaller farmers, and it was at CSU here in Denver, the Spur. And it was weird because afterwards his staff member said, "Can you wait here? Secretary Vilsack wants to talk to you." And so he sat me down and drew a bunch of diagrams and explained his plan to save small farms. And I actually still have those note cards, but I'd had to write a book report for Michael Bennett later on what he said. But really it's a lot about, it's profitability, right? It's the ability to profit from what you're doing, to be able to diversify your operation, to resiliency, of course. And I think with one thing, and I'll get back to the environment, I guess, I think that, first I'll just say, supporting regional food systems, which not only helps smaller farms and smaller operations, but helps the community at large, providing healthy food for kids in school and for communities that have food deserts, and it is really all interconnected. In regard to environment, I think one thing that we do have to follow regulations, right, in terms of, clean water, clean air, things like that. But, when it comes to especially large farms and a lot of these conservation programs, something that we haven't really said is these programs are voluntary for pretty much across the board. And so the key, I think, here is making sure that you're giving incentives to the farmers, and the incentives are good enough that they will voluntarily participate in these programs. And so I think that's finding the balance. So rather than mandating something across the board and forcing farmers to have anaerobic digesters, things like that, find ways to incentivize it to make it profitable for them. And another part of this lies largely outside of the Farm Bill, connected, of course. It's the market. And we've seen the market, people who want food want to know where their food comes from. They want to know that it was produced in an environmentally friendly way, that in a way that will help fight climate change, humane methods, things like that. And the money there speaks from consumers and really does drive these larger companies, whether it's grocery store chains, other food providers, and then of course back down to the farms, make sure that they do well by what the consumer wants.
Wow, thank you very much. We're now into the last few minutes, so I'm just going to give you about 30 seconds to 1 minute, and then I'll turn to James also, about something you really would like to see in this Farm Bill, and just highlight your top priority. And I know James, before the session, had told me that Senator Bennett welcomes suggestions and ideas. So this is our opportunity, not just right now in the panel, but also afterwards, to talk about some of the priorities we'd like to see. And then I have a final question for James. So top priority in this Farm Bill?
Currently, I am a research scientist for the Agricultural Research Service currently. So I can't say anything about what policies that I would like to see, but I will give you all some facts. Investment in U.S. public ag research and development has fallen by a third over the past 2 decades. And we do lag behind major trade competitors in terms of the money that we're devoting to ag R&D research. So that peaked in 2002. And so the past farm bills have reduced that amount of spending, reducing the budget, cutting overhead, but I think that's might be short-sighted given what we have on the horizon and currently with climate change.
I think just passing the Farm Bill would be cool. But also, really just focusing back on giving directive and funding for small to mid-size specific programs that are really focused on meeting the needs of those producers. Right on the list.
I think I already gave a little bit of a saga of EDF's priorities as a whole towards the beginning, but I'll just kind of double down on what my work specifically is, which is that we're really hoping that there are manure methane solutions, and that's reduced costs and it's increased technical assistance, and it's also outside of the Farm Bill, it's working closely with folks at NRCS and making sure that those recommendations and those voluntary programs and things like that have the costs and assistance that is really needed to make them be implemented.
Can I just say one more thing? I already gave you Senator Bennett's priorities, but there's something we didn't mention today at all, and that's one title of the Farm Bill, which is rural development, and we do have some bills related. Senator Bennett has introduced some legislation related to that, but these are our rural communities. These are grants and low-interest loans to build hospitals, community centers, wastewater treatment, all these things that these small communities lack, that they don't have the ability to charge their utility customers, X amount of dollars, right? But, rural development programs are important, and there are, within that, one of the huge part is a REAP program, Rural Energy for America program, and that also incentivizes and gives grants and loans for renewable energy, of course, so in rural communities.
James, I just want to get your final thoughts on the status of the bill. If you can speak to anything. The Farm Bill was supposed to be updated last year in 2023, but we're still in the negotiation phase. And of course, the Hill is famously known for its agreement. People just can't stop finding consensus, right? And we're also at a time of a strong budget deficit. So where are we with the Farm Bill currently? What does the process look like from here on, if you can speak to that? And just give us a sense a little bit about what we can expect this year with the Farm Bill.
So there, as you could imagine, a lot of competing interests when it comes to the Farm Bill and limited dollars, and where does that money go, and which programs should we prioritize? And there are some very fundamental disagreements. I think, broadly speaking, the one thing that we hear so much is, why is nutrition in the Farm Bill, right? It's called the Farm Bill, but you have, most of it is spent on nutrition programs. Well, there's a reason for that, and that is that if you did not have nutrition programs in the Farm Bill, the members of Congress from largely urban areas probably wouldn't vote for it, right? And so there's this marriage of these two, farm and nutrition that allows the Farm Bill to pass as a whole when it does, and gets everyone on board. And typically a Farm Bill is bipartisan as well. So that is one area among a few where there's a bipartisan agreement that we need to pass a Farm Bill. We need it. But the question is then, what does it look like? And so, Senator Stabenow, the chair of the Ag Committee, she released a framework last week for the Farm Bill, and it does, it, among other things, it conserves the money from the IRA for conservation programs. There's a whole lot of other stuff that I'll skip over. And of course, we're expecting a House version here soon. We haven't seen that. We've seen some talking points and maybe some summaries, but for example, the ranking Republican member in the Senate Ag Committee, Senator Boozman, says he wants to see increased federal subsidies and at the expense of nutrition and climate smart ag programs. So you can see, I think it's really going to come down to making sure, and we're not going to have increased funding generally speaking. That is where the disagreement lies, and eventually we will come to an agreement, we imagine. But I don't know what else to say there. I mean, I guess it's just wait and see, and let's hope we don't have to pass another extension and we can get a 5-year Farm Bill.
On that note, I want to highlight that the Farm Bill might be overdue, but the negotiations are alive and happening. So this is our chance to go a little bit deeper and talk about it in our table discussion. So I want to thank all the panelists for their very thoughtful comments and turn to Tamara to lead us into the next section of this roundtable.
So let me first ask us to thank our panelists.